Education is the key to a better future. At least that's what we've always been told. But the cost of getting a degree is on the rise in the UK, saddling graduates with massive debts. So is going to university still a good investment? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Post-secondary tuition fees in England are the highest in Europe. Innovations like AI mean more uncertainty in the world of work. And many young people are now questioning whether more education is the best way forward.
Zeno is a postgraduate student in London. He's had to borrow money to pay for his higher education, and he's accumulated about $95,000 in debt.
I think I just have to accept the fact that I have an additional tax for the next 30 years, and it's not a big problem.
Not everyone is as sanguine when it comes to facing a lifetime of repayments. One survey found that 32% of Brits aged 18 to 24 agreed that a university degree is a waste of time. A degree plus living expenses is now estimated to cost over $77,000. Tuition fees for public post-secondary education in England are the highest across developed nations. The Bank of Mum and Dad, therefore, can make a big difference.
It's true that the richest graduates will be a little better off in future, and the somewhat poorer graduates will be a little bit worse off because they'll be repaying more of their loans. And some people think that's unfair.
Prohibitively steep fees means less socioeconomic and ethnic diversity, which then feeds into the workforce. Studies have shown that the median salary for university graduates is $12,000 more than those who don't attend. But many of these surveys don't take the lifelong debt burden into account. So young people are wondering if owing large sums of money is the best way to start their working lives.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Sheffield in the UK is Colin Alexander. He's a senior lecturer in political communications at Nottingham Trent University. With me in the studio is Graeme Atherton. He's the head of the Centre for Inequality and Levelling Up. That's at the University of West London. He's also director of the UK's National Education Opportunities Network. Rose Stephenson is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Higher Education Policy Institute. And Tia O'Donnell is a recent graduate of Central St Martin's in Fine Arts and has been campaigning for a refund of her tuition fees. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Tia, I'll come to you first. You made quite a protest at your graduation ceremony. You want a refund for your fees. Just tell me why.
Well, if I put it point blank at the beginning, and then I'll explain why I personally felt like I needed to campaign for a refund, is students ultimately paid for a service. The service wasn't delivered. And in any other sort of establishment or business, if you didn't receive what you paid for, you'd be entitled to some form of compensation or a refund. And I think this rule applies. And, you know, not only has it affected me, my fellow students, we've got over 150,000 students that have signed on to the student group claim, which is taking on universities to see if we are capable to get a refund in court. But it's affected international students, and it's a domino effect. You know, these pinnacle years of my life have been affected by not only COVID, but tutor strikes as well. And it's the quality education that I've received is not up to scratch with what I've paid for.
But you still got a degree.
I do, but in a sense, I feel like it's slightly fraudulent because it's not of quality, it's not of value as I was promised at the beginning.
What reaction have you had?
I've had, so far, a great reaction from my peers and some tutors as well. I think, you know, I want to really underline the fact that I'm not here, you know, saying that tutors didn't do their job. Tutors did the best that they could, and I really value their time and their efforts. But it's, you know, the big boys at the top who aren't, you know, playing fair. They're not, in terms of the university food chain, students are at the bottom, tutors are somewhere close to the bottom, and they're on up. But so far the reaction's been great, but it's still a long journey to go. So yeah.
Rose, give me your reaction to Tia's story. Is she right to ask for a refund?
So I have a huge sympathy for you, Tia, and your peers. You know, these were students that finished their school and college years in the start of lockdown, which is really the time of your life where you should be out doing things that you're not really supposed to do. But it's really important that you do them as part of your development. Then we reopened universities. Students were coming back in September. I was working in a university at the time. And we were hoping that that would be kind of back to normal. But it just wasn't the case in COVID, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
The lockdown restrictions at that point were still, if one person in your flat has COVID, everyone's in for 2 weeks. So it was just rolling lockdowns for those students. Lots of courses were online, which worked well for some, but I suspect probably not for yours if you're at Central St Martin's. Yeah. So I do have a lot of sympathy, and I think it's a valid question. And I'm always impressed by students who stick up for themselves. I think when we should really worry is when students aren't having these conversations with us about what they should have for their service that they were expecting. Although, you know, incredibly challenging times for universities as well.
Graeme, what do you think of what Tia is saying?
Well, like Rose says, I have a lot of sympathy for Tia's position as well. I mean, and I can't comment about your individual circumstances, and I think subjects differ as well, like Rose said. I mean, particularly in the lockdown scenario, some subjects were easier to maintain than others. I think particularly I look back on my time as a student and think what it'd been like if like yourself, it was really hampered by the challenges you face. However, of course, at the same time, I think most universities did their best to deliver what they could under challenging circumstances. And certainly the university system is under great financial pressure at the moment. And I think clearly when we talk about refunds, etc., we need to think about the role of government in this as well. Because in the moment, what we do in the spend one of the least amounts of the more advanced industrialised nations on higher education in this country. And the challenges that puts all at universities under is extreme. I mean, those who strike are doing so for very good reasons. They're often on casualised part-time contracts themselves, having done 1 or 2, even more, even 3 degrees in some instances. So I have sympathy as well for those who are challenged by Tia's actions, but at the same time, I do understand that Tia really wanted to get the best from your time there and you feel you didn't.
Colin, do you think this might take off? Tia setting an example, saying, I demand a refund, and a lot of other students will be in the exact same position, having had what they feel was an inferior service during the COVID years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I'll also say that I sympathise with the position there. I also approach this, first of all, as a lecturer, but also as somebody who's interested in political activism as well. I think that, yes, it will take off. It already has taken off. And there is a sort of beautiful simplicity to what is trying to be achieved here. They're not really asking for, they're not looking to expand the conversation into why this has happened in terms of the problems of, whether young people were thought about particularly well during lockdowns, etc. However, I don't think that Tia is actually right to ask for a refund. I think that there are a variety of other ways in which this student group could have pressurised the university and achieved success. So I've got some question marks around that, but also around the potential damage that this can do to the university or the higher education structure of this country as well, given that particularly in the north of England, a lot of the cities are very reliant upon income coming from the student population. So if we begin to sort of batter the university sector too much, then that can have some quite serious economic implications for the wider communities of those cities as well.
Tia, what would you say back to Colin and what you've just heard from the others?
I understand. I think that I see both sides to the coin that I've flipped. But I do think that the rule still stands in just general terms anyway. If you've asked for a service, it hasn't been delivered, and you're entitled to some form of compensation. I'm not necessarily stating that I would love all of the money back. in terms of what actually is refundable, we've calculated it out, and it's roughly £5,000 per student. Also, depending whether you were affected by COVID learning or tutor strikes or just those singularly, that will depend on how much of a refund you'll be entitled to. But, you know, in comparison to how much student debt I have, that is not even knocking just a slight, you know, bit of relief off for me. So,
do you mind me asking roughly what that figure stands at after all your education?
Sure, it's close to £50,000.
And your friends and contemporaries, are they all in the same boat?
Well, a lot of my international friends who were students studying here, they have almost double that. So, you know, and in terms of their compensation, it's slightly different. If you know, we ever get a chance to redeem some form of compensation. But, you know, as a young person stepping out into the world, that's a daunting amount of money to be holding on your shoulders, and also not feeling like the degree that you bestow is of value of £50,000.
Rose, it begs the question, is a degree worth it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, I think, particularly for people who are sitting with those numbers on their student loan statements. There's been some new research that's come out recently by Universities UK, which is really good research. It looks at, it's looking at UK students, and it looks at people who did quite well at what we call level 3, so A-levels, and could have gone to university but chose not to, and compares that to people who went to university. And it shows that obviously the people who go straight into work start earning more quickly to begin with, but once people graduate quite quickly, they catch up with their peers and it crosses over. So within a few years as a graduate, you're earning about 20% more than people who didn't go to university.
Year on year, yeah?
Yeah, as your salary, 20% more. And by the time you get to 31, you're earning about 37% more than someone who didn't go to university. So, and that's across things like arts and media subjects, which are often described as kind of rip-off or Mickey Mouse. It shows that that isn't the case. And it's across all regions of the UK as well. So if you look at it just in terms of salary, never mind all the other bits you get from going to university, then it does look like a degree is worth it.
Graeme, same question to you. Is a degree worth going into debt to the tune of £50,000?
I think at an individual level, it's a very challenging question. I mean, we work predominantly with young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, of course, who don't have parents to support them. And of course, that debt means a lot more when you don't have parents who have a home or have wealth behind you. So that becomes an even more acute question for the students that we support. I mean, as Rose said, I mean, the evidence shows overall that, yes, on balance, on average, you still earn more by being a graduate. There is also future skill projections that we'll need 11 million more graduates in the next 10 years. So, and it's an entry qualification for many jobs. But you have to think about it as individuals as well. It's very important that we support young people and others to make the right decisions and it's difficult. You're making these huge decisions about your future career and the debt you're developing like you did, Tia, when you're actually pretty young. You know, a young person making these big decisions. We have a real responsibility, I think, in schools, colleges, universities and the whole system to try and support young people to make the right decisions for them, even if it's a degree or even if it's not a degree. Because otherwise, on average, yes, but some people it won't be the right thing for them as well. You must recognise that.
Colin, just give us your take on student debt, people coming out £50,000 in debt, but they've got a degree.
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think there's a bit of a falsehood to this conversation, though. I mean, if you're of a particular age, then you didn't pay tuition fees. I didn't pay tuition fees and therefore came out with a substantially reduced debt. I think there's a falsehood here because the only reason that we're really talking about this and refunds is because of post-2012, we've had 9,000 and then 9,000 plus a year tuition fees. And therefore, we have students coming out. And my concern about Tia, just to go back to my previous point, is that it feels quite reductionist to simply say that education is a transaction. And I think that education is about much more than that. It's about the raising of one's consciousness, skill development, the ethical self. There's an element of transition from childhood to adulthood. All these sorts of things go on within the university environment that are not particularly tangible or quantifiable, if you like. So I think that the educational experience is about much more than that, and to just reduce it to "I want a refund" almost sort of detracts from the wider experience of doing so. So yeah, I'm just a bit concerned as to how we're approaching this. Of this, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? We're thinking about this in very, very small terms around the financials of it. But ultimately, I do still sympathise in that, I wouldn't want to be a sort of 21-year-old, 22-year-old leaving a higher education establishment with £50,000 worth of debt. That's a huge consideration, and one that will be burdensome, usually well into their 30s and even 40s.
Colin and everyone, I want to talk about the cost of living crisis. So the UK's Higher Educational Policy Institute has found that students are doubly affected by the cost of living crisis. Costs have gone up. Their maintenance support has not kept up with inflation. So most students say their financial situation has worsened over the past year. 1/3 of those surveyed say financial challenges put them at risk of leaving their programme entirely. And over half say they've missed out on extracurricular activities. 55% say they've missed out on social experiences because they simply can't afford them. Rose, just talk to us about the cost of living from a student's perspective. I mean, things are getting very tight.
Beyond tight, and this is not being dealt with by the policymakers at the moment. So the maintenance support system that exists in the 4 countries in the UK, because they're all slightly different, is not adequate in any of those places. The amount of money you get also depends on where you lived before you went to university, not where you're studying. So a Welsh student living and studying in London will get about £15,000, and a Northern Irish student studying in London will get around £11,000, which is a huge difference in terms of what you're living on. Neither of those are enough, looking at the research that we've done, that students need to live a basic but socially acceptable lifestyle. So at the moment, those gaps are being filled by parental support if you have it, but the expectation on parents is beyond what's acceptable. You have to start paying to support your adult student children, even if you're only earning just over £25,000 as a household, which is a tiny amount of money in 2024. So we're seeing that parents are struggling to support their children, and students are also now working a huge amount of hours. So most students now work. The last research we published showed that of the students at work, they're working 13.5 hours a week, which is starting to impact their studies, but as you said, also their social life. So what you get from university is becoming less because you're having to do so much extra work. So that issue of maintenance support is really critical to being able to get really well-rounded graduates going into the workplace, and it does need to be addressed by the next government that comes in.
Graeme, are we reaching a stage in the UK where a degree education is going to completely exclude working-class young people?
There's a risk of this happening, and this is what we try and work against all the time, to give these young people the support that they need to progress to higher education, because not only have we talked about the debt, but as Rose talked about, there's working pressures as well. I mean, there's an assumption that you can find paid work as a student. I mean, we're also competing against other young people who need work as well. The reliance upon parental support, if that's not there, what's going to affect working class participation? And we're looking at that as well from this angle. And families and parents as well will look at these options and they just feel they can't support their children to go to HE. And even if they do, then possibly it's constrained choice as well. So you end up going to a course you don't really want to do, a place you don't want to go to because you have to live at home, you need your part-time job as well. And this all goes back to Tia's question as well about value, because when you're paying this amount of money, you want to go to the course that you want to do, that fulfills your ambitions and your skill and takes you forward. If indeed working class people can get to HE, it might be to university that perhaps a course they don't really want to go to, but it's the only thing can actually possibly works for them because they don't think they can afford.
Tia, just back to you on the issue of working while you're at university. What was the feeling like amongst your classmates and your friends having to balance the fear and the debt and the worry about money? You got to do your coursework, and then a lot of young people are having to find time to actually go out and work 13, 14 hours a week.
It was difficult, and it's difficult to balance because, especially in my course, particularly, it was a self-directed course. So all of your you know, you'd meet your tutor maybe once or twice a week, twice if you're lucky, and the rest of the time it's dedicated to you. So you have to figure out a schedule that works for you, as well as, you know, paying for student accommodation, you know, trying to have the university experience, although in my case and with my peers, unfortunately, we didn't really quite have the experience, obviously, due to the circumstances. But being able to find the balance between the two is quite difficult. And I know that I struggled. I took every opportunity that I could in order to make some money because I knew that I had, you know, this looming over me as soon as I finished. So, yeah, it was very difficult to balance it all.
Colin, do you worry that young people from working class backgrounds are just getting more and more obstacles put in their way in terms of higher education?
Yeah, that is something that I've seen. I mean, I've been a lecturer at Nottingham Trent for 11 years. So there's a kind of pre, during and post-COVID sort of analysis that I'm about to give you here. But I've noticed that as the cost of living crisis has emerged, then certainly people from working class backgrounds are forced to work more. The universities have also increased the number of hours of group contact time as well, which means that actually people from working class backgrounds tend to miss more classes because of their schedules. Beyond that as well, though, I think that we also have some significant mental health challenges with young people where, and I think that some of that at least is in reference to lockdowns and that kind of stunting of those teenage experiences that should happen. And that all leads into this really quite difficult scenario where we often have below 50% attendance rates, and also that the students are quite stressed because of the various issues that are going on in their private and financial lives, and so they're not really turning up ready and focused and presenting themselves ready to learn either. So there's kind of a sort of cauldron of problems which have emerged. Not all of them, certainly the university's fault by any means, but yeah, certainly the experience of being a lecturer now certainly has some challenges that were not there before the pandemic.
Rose, just tell me, we've had weeks now of campaigning in politics in the UK for the election that's coming up very, very closely now. Very little mention of third-level education, funding, fees, student experience. This isn't a vote winner.
No, and political parties don't really want to talk about it, partly because it's going to cost money. So I've already mentioned increasing maintenance support. But as Graeme mentioned, the UK higher education sector is in really big trouble in terms of their own finances. So yes, tuition fees are expensive, £9,000 just over, but that hasn't gone up for a long time and it's now worth to universities less than £6,000. So there's been a third cut in terms of teaching income for home students, and that's really having an impact in universities, as we've seen with many redundancies in UK universities. But solving that problem is really challenging. Putting up tuition fees is politically, really very tricky. Certainly no one's going to be mentioning that, I don't think, prior to the election. The government in England in particular doesn't put a huge amount into the system. It really is on the shoulders of graduates. But again, there isn't a huge amount of public funding available. And if there were money available, it wouldn't be going to universities, I would argue. It would be going to schools and the NHS.
Graeme, just give us your interpretation of what fees are like around Europe. I mean, are British students paying an awful lot more than, say, French or German or Italians?
A lot more.
Really?
In Germany, there isn't a fee. It's free. In France, the fee is very low. It's less than 1,000 euros, 600 euros, something like that. Even in Italy, it's very low as well. The actual cost of going to higher education in England, not in Scotland, of course, where it's free, is higher than any other country in the OECD, which is the 30 richest countries in the world, really. So our students pay a lot. People like to pay a lot for their education. And as Rose said, that because it's very dependent upon student income, and that fee has not increased, we have a double problem here. We have universities which are on the brink, some of real financial problems. I mean, Colin pointed out as well that in certain parts of the country, anchor institutions, universities, they provide economic value in particular places. On the other hand, we have students who, many of whom are in real poverty. And poverty is poverty. If you're a student, if you're a young person, an old person, it doesn't matter who you are. So yes, comparatively we pay a lot, but the system itself really isn't functioning at the moment. And as Rose said, politically, it's something people don't want to touch. But the next government's going to have to touch it, because if a university was to go into free fall, the broad implications for that area, for the students, those employed, that community would be huge. And no government want to see that, I don't think.
Colin, I just want to ask you, whoever is Prime Minister for the next 5 years in the United Kingdom, what would you like to see that person do with regard to higher education?
I really think that the universities have to invest into their frontline staff first and foremost. And from there, hopefully, the sort of tentacles of that spread out into student engagement and the quality of responses that we get from students, and also into the wider community that we provide and present more kind of civically conscious, ethically appropriate young people into society.
Colin, Tia, Rose and Graeme, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.